Ladies and gentlemen, this is a good opportunity for me to remind you to please silence all of your electronics. We gather this morning to remember and celebrate a remarkable life, our friend Jack Grynberg, and call forward Cantor Marty Goldstein to open our service with Psalm 23.
It's nice to be here today to honor Jack and his beautiful family. I was mentioning to the family that Jack and Celeste were huge supporters of the arts in Denver, mostly Mom, and it's so important to keep the arts alive, and I want to thank you for that. Mizmor LeDavid Adonai ro'i lo echsar Bino deshe yarbitseni Aleme menuchot yenaleni Nafshi yeshovev Yandcheni v'maglet tzedek Leman Shemo Kama ki elech begates al mavet Lo yirara Ki ata imadi Shirtecha umishanetecha Heima yenachamoni Ta'aruch lefanai shulchan neged soderai Tishanta b'Hashem en roshi kosir vaya Achtav v'chesed Yirdefuni Kol Yemei Chayai V'shaveti B'veit Adonai Leorech Yamim
Mizmor LeDavid Adonai ro'i lo echsar bino deshe yarbitseni The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I'm very sad for Jack's passing, and I want to extend my condolences to Celeste and the children, Rachel and Rick, Stephen and Susan and Miriam, and the 4 grandchildren, Stella and Oliver, Talia and Jared, on the loss of a fine man. I've known Jack and his family for a very long time. I got to know Jack best as we would sit together at APEC policy conferences in Washington. We shared a rather conservative, right-wing, and very hawkish outlook when it came to Israel. I visited Jack once in his office, geological maps everywhere. We talked about Menachem Begin and the Irgun and his hope to raise the ship Altalena, sunk by the brand new Israel Defense Forces led by Ben-Gurion, June 22, 1948. Begin was his model from the earliest days, as Begin is for me as well. I will miss Jack. I will miss those conversations. I was very glad when the Grynbergs joined our shul. They have made a great difference for our community and for the wider community since that time. I pray that God will bind up Jack Grynberg in the bonds of eternal life. May his memory always be as a blessing. Amen.
At this time, we call upon Rabbi Engel of Chabad. Jack and his family have many connections throughout the Jewish community, and we call forward Rabbi Engel now to share some words with us.
I want to thank the Hebrew Education Alliance for making it possible for myself as a Kohen to be here by keeping the Oren, the body, outside and only bringing him inside after I finish, at which point I will have to make a quick exit to allow the body to enter. And when you think about it, this idea of Mr. Grynberg being outside while we, the Kohanim, my son Shmuley is here as well, to be able to come inside really speaks about the character of Mr. Grynberg, of always being so accommodating and stepping to the side, making sure that everything is done right. There is a sign that graces the wall outside Jack's office. And it's a verse that I've heard Mr. Grynberg recite by heart with great pride, remembering the words from his days in Hebrew school. And this is taken from the book of Job, from the book of Eov. And I quote, and as I say it, I can hear Mr. Grynberg saying it, Ki Odom la'omol yulod. A man is born to toil. Ubnei reshev yagbiu uf. While the spiritual beings soar in flight. And this is a very vivid description of our life on earth. I've had the privilege of knowing Mr. Grynberg and the family for almost 2 decades. I think back of all the wonderful experiences and life cycles that we've shared. The ones that we've shared at his office so many times, at our home, Friday night dinners, Pesach Seder, Chanukah event that we shared. And Mr. Grynberg was somebody who never wanted to stop being productive, not only within himself, but in others. And yet, he was able to have a sensitivity to those around him who did not have the opportunity to have the things and do the things that he had and that he did. Mr. Grynberg, in our discussions, very often expressed, as we just heard, his great love for Israel. Oh, how he loved Israel. And he would always describe how we would fight for Israel before Israel was declared as a state. We had, besides a professional relationship, we had a personal relationship. We would, in our visits, we would discuss Torah, we would learn, and he took great interest in our family. He loved our family as we loved him. As a matter of fact, we affectionately called him Uncle Yankel, and he loved it. Mr. Grynberg was a great supporter of our Chabad, Lubavitch, Colorado, and our Beis Menachem. And besides giving, he loved to give. The Talmud tells us that giving and helping elicits a certain amount of blessings, but giving with a heart elicits so many more blessings. He put his heart and soul into supporting our projects and institutions. The thing that stands out in my mind is the way his eyes lit up and sparkled with pride and joy and excitement when he would tell me about the Torah scroll, the Grynberg Torah scroll that I'm sure you're all familiar with, that he rescued in 1998 in a trip to Poland, that he found in a store in Krakow. And through great effort and cost, he had it brought to Denver and then sent to New York and had it checked. But he loved it, and I remember in addition to the Torah scroll, there's a part of the story that preceded it, and that is that there were 3 old volumes of the Talmud, ancient volumes of the Talmud, that he also rescued. And I remember sitting with him, and it's on the table, and he lovingly caressed the Talmud volumes because he loved it so much. He loved Judaism, and he took great pride in being part of the Jewish people. I remember him sitting, and when we had a Torah scroll dedicated to the 6 million Kedoshim, the 6 million souls who gave their lives as Jews and died in the Holocaust, and we dedicated a Torah scroll to that effort, and the first few letters, Mr. Grynberg inked one of the letters. Such pride, such nachas, such dedication, and such devotion. He had a fiery spirit, which I admired. I remember once we had a case of vandalism in our building, and the huge window was smashed in by somebody in the middle of the night, and when he heard about it, he said, I'm going to hire a private detective to get to the bottom of this, because he would not sit by and let something like this go unresolved. This was Mr. Grynberg. So at this point, with great gratitude to Mr. Grynberg and his entire family, and he so much loved his family, this point I turned to Uncle Yankel and I offer the following words. But I wonder, what words can I tell him? Uncle Yankel, what can I say to you? What is my way of saying, I don't like to use the word goodbye, but in your journey to the next world, what can I tell you? This is what I feel like telling you. There's one thing that you loved to hear. You loved the Birchas Kehanim. You loved to hear the priestly blessings. And I loved to give the priestly blessings. So here is my words to you, Uncle Yankel. The quote from the Torah, in the fourth book of the Torah, Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe Lamer, Daber el Aharon vel Bonov Lamer, Kois Varuchos Bnei Yisrael, Omer Lahem, Yivarachecho Adonai v'yishmerecha, Yer Adonai Ponav Elecha v'yichuneka, Yisa Adonai Ponav Elecha v'yosim l'cha sholem, v'samay shmi Bnei Yisrael v'ani avorchem. And God spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to Aaron, the high priest. Tell the Jewish people, this is the way you should bless, that you should bench the Jewish people. That God should bless you and should protect you, should watch you. Hashem should illuminate you with his countenance and be gracious to you. And Hashem should uplift his face upon you and provide for you peace. Mr. Grynberg, Yaakov, and Shlomo, Solomon, go in peace, have a great journey. We'll always remember you. My condolences to the family. And I like to quote the verse from the book of Yeshaya, Isaiah. Bila hamoves lanetzach, God is going to eliminate death permanently. Umoch Hashem alikim dimo me'al kol ponim. And Hashem is going to wipe out, to eradicate, to erase tears from all the faces. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Engel. In a few moments, we will escort Jack's casket into the sanctuary. Before we do, I want to share with you some of what I've learned about Jack and what I've known about Jack in the years that he has been part of our community. Jack Grynberg was a survivor. Most of us here, of course, know that Jack had survived the Holocaust, yet survival was core to who he was. He was a survivor throughout his life, resilient, using his ingenuity and bravery. These were core to everything Jack did throughout his life. Jack was born in 1932 to Solomon and Fania Grynberg and was raised in Brest-Litovsk, which was then part of Poland and today Belarus. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Jack was a young boy. He and his parents initially fled to Ukraine but returned to Brest, where they were interned in a ghetto. They escaped from the ghetto and found shelter with a family that Fania had served as a pediatrician. The Grynbergs hid in a barn for nearly 2 years before joining Polish partisan resistance fighters. At the age of 12, Jack Grynberg learned how to fight. After the war, the family returned to Brest, only to find that the city that had once been a home to 23,000 Jews and a major center of Eastern European Jewish life had no Jews left. Only a couple dozen of those 23,000 Jews survived the Holocaust, including Jack and his parents and his older brothers who had escaped separate from the rest of the family, Victor and Davy. Jack's brothers, who were much older than he was, had gone into the army earlier and had found their own route of escape. One of Jack's brothers, who had escaped to make his way to Palestine, discovered that his family was still alive. He helped them join him in pre-state Palestine in 1947. Jack, who was only 15 at the time, lied about his age in order to join the Irgun, also known as Etzel, a paramilitary force that followed the revisionist philosophy of Zev Jabotinsky. Jack was very proud of the role he played in defending the country he would call his home. Having only completed a few years of schooling prior to the war, Jack nonetheless completed high school in Israel. When Israeli universities were giving priority to the backlog of older students whose education had been interrupted by the War of Independence, Jack applied to universities abroad. He was accepted to the Colorado School of Mines, where he was awarded a scholarship. And though he didn't speak English when he arrived, Jack managed to complete 2 bachelor's degrees simultaneously in just 2.5 years, in petroleum engineering and geophysics. He went on to earn a master's degree at Mines as well. His first job was with Conoco in Oklahoma, but Jack, always the survivor, was not one to be dependent on others for his livelihood. He was determined to set out on his own, and he quickly started his own company. He was what is called a wildcat driller, someone who explores for oil where little or no geological information is available. But Jack didn't just go out exploring on a hunch. Jack became an industry expert in finding oil and gas where others had tried and failed. He found success by buying wells that had been abandoned, and using technological methods that he himself developed, he located oil where it had not been found before. It was around that time that Jack took a job with the Army Corps of Engineers, teaching his methods at the headquarters near Washington, D.C. Jack contacted an old friend of his that he had known in Denver, Barbara Goldberg, who introduced Jack to her friend Celeste. Jack and Celeste hit it off and dated long distance while Celeste was completing her education in social work. Jack and Celeste married in 1959, first in a ceremony with Celeste's family in Philadelphia, and then in a second wedding in Switzerland, so that Jack's parents could travel from Israel. Jack and Celeste moved to Denver shortly after their wedding and set out to have their children, Rachel, Stephen, and Miriam. Jack was dedicated to his work, and he was driven by a seemingly endless supply of energy. He would come home after a long day at work with a stack of foreign newspapers and petroleum industry journals, scouring them for potential business leads. He had a knack for sniffing out oil and gas. Jack traveled a great deal as well. The children cherished the time they had with him. Jack loved to ski, and he encouraged his children to learn so that they could ski together. He enjoyed taking the family out to restaurants. He inculcated in his children the value of education and professional success. He especially pushed them to learn math, and he would often drill them and their friends on multiplication tables. And Jack often brought his family along on his business trips. Over the years, they got to meet heads of state, dignitaries, and business leaders all around the world. When the kids were young, the Grynbergs traveled to Israel every year to visit Jack's parents. Jack did not speak much about his experience of the Holocaust. Nonetheless, his life experience informed everything that he did. At his core, Jack had the spirit of a survivor. He had learned from the example his mother had set. She used her clever mind and hearty strength to save the family. Jack believed in solving problems by applying his creativity, ingenuity, and sheer force of will. He had many successes, but also some failures. He took risks where others did not dare. He was scrappy and fought for what he believed to be just. He didn't back down from a challenge or from a fight. Jack was adventurous, bold, befriending people wherever he went. He had lifelong business relationships that turned into genuine friendships. Jack was fearless. Jack Grynberg had a big heart. He was empathetic and generous, but was a man of few words. He spoke with his actions, cognizant that he had succeeded because of the generous help he had received from others at critical times in his life. Jack made a point of giving to individuals in need. He gave generously to causes that he believed in. He supported the Colorado School of Mines, serving very proudly on its board of trustees. He was an ardent supporter of organizations that worked for the betterment of the land of Israel and the people of Israel, including AJC, the Joint Distribution Committee, AIPAC, HIAS, and JNF. Jack was proud to be a Jew and contributed generously to Jewish organizations and synagogues. He worked very hard, But Jack also knew how to enjoy the good things in life. He loved music, theater, and opera. Whenever he would find himself in a cultural hub like New York or London, he would make a point of seeing shows. Despite his drive and determination, and notwithstanding his great success, Jack loved his family and cherished time with his children and grandchildren. Jack adored his grandchildren, Stella and Oliver, Jared and Talia. He played backgammon with them and loved to take them to restaurants to introduce them to foods he loved. He quizzed them too, as he had done with his children. He promoted their education and supported them in their interests and pursuits. Jack Grynberg will be missed by his beloved family and his dear friends. His legacy and values will live on in his children, Rachel and Rick, Stephen and Susan, and Miriam. Jack will be remembered as a generous and loving Saba by his grandchildren, Stella and Oliver, Jared and Talia. May the memory of Jack Grynberg be an enduring blessing to them, and may he now rest in peace. We now will ask you to please rise. We'll call Cantor Goldstein forward to escort Jack's casket into the room.
Shir Malot Esaenai Hari Me'ayin Yavo Ezri.
You may be seated. We call forward Rachel Grynberg now to share some words with us.
We'll see how well I can get through this. First, I just want to thank all of you for being here to honor my father. I know that he is there and appreciates it, as do we. I'd like to ask all of you to please turn on your phones. My father did not go to a synagogue, a service, or a funeral without leaving his phone on, and I'm sure that it would go off, and I know he would appreciate it. The last words my father spoke, while pointing at his fish pond filled with red koi, were, "Let's catch that fish and cook it for dinner." His illness had often rendered him silent, but that day, 7 weeks ago, he was talkative and funny, and we had a beautiful day. He was a man of few words, but those words were quintessentially my dad. It didn't matter that he was on a feeding tube. He was an eternal optimist and a lover of all things fish. Gefilte fish, lox and eggs, kippered herring, and apparently his pet koi. And he was committed to eating that fish. And when my father was committed, nothing would stop him. My dad ran at lightning speed all the time. He was fueled by fire. His dreams were born of ashes, but his dreams were big, and they were important. He dreamed of traveling the world, he dreamed of studying complicated things, and he dreamed of building businesses. But mostly, he dreamed of building a family. He used to say, "You can take away your home, they can take away their money, but no one will ever take away your education." He devoured content, spoke 6 languages, and read 4 periodicals a day. And in addition to science, he was well-versed in history, poetry, theater, and literature, and he was a fabulous dancer. I loved nothing more than dancing with my father. Lifelong learning was essential, and he made it possible for his children and his grandchildren to have the gift and the privilege of education. My dad loved the oil business and thrived on making deals all over the world. I would often travel with him and was in awe of his energy, imagination, his creativity, and his persistence. I can still picture him, the Polish wildcatter with a Savile Row suit, silk bow tie, a flannel Stetson, wool socks, and Birkenstocks, convincing heads of state to give him concessions. You may never see it in a magazine, but he had style. He had a towering intellect, excessive amounts of chutzpah, and absolutely no fear. He was laser-focused and found ways to accomplish things that had long thwarted others. My dad never took no for an answer. If there was a problem, he would figure out a way to solve it. When I was 7, Stephen and I traveled with him on a European business tour. All of our vacations were thinly disguised business trips, with some occasional fun mixed in. On one of the legs, we were in Copenhagen Airport, and I lost Furry. Furry was a 1-inch by 7-inch long remnant of a fur coat, and I loved it. When my father learned of the disappearance, he corralled the airport police force to look for that remnant scrap of rodent fur, and after 2 hours, Furry was found in an ashtray, reeking of cigarettes. He scooped it up, gave it a bath and an air dry, and we ran down the tarmac to our flight within moments of takeoff. It is no surprise that my dad wasn't always a model parent. On that same trip, with my mother at home with baby Miriam, my dad had a lengthy business meeting and didn't know what to do with Stephen and me. So he dropped us off. I was 7, Stephen was 6, at the Tivoli Gardens, an amusement park in Copenhagen, bought us $10 worth of ride tickets, and left us to fend for ourselves. We were terrified and spent the entire time going up and down the same slide over and over again until my dad arrived about 8 hours later when the sun set. That experience, among many others, built my character, a fierce, sometimes sadly fierce, independence, and possibly a few years of therapy. I can't talk to you without my dad without discussing the L word. Litigation. Litigation was in his blood. But up until the latter years, when dementia caused his judgment to stray and he could no longer distinguish between friend, family, and foe, his litigious nature arose from an unyielding sense of fairness. He used the court systems to right wrongs when he thought he or others were exploited. He related deeply to the outsider, and there was no one he wouldn't help. I've been told by so many who knew him that my dad didn't see color or consider himself better. He was tough, but he treated people with the respect that they deserved. A child of war, he lost almost everyone in the Holocaust but his immediate family, and survival to my dad meant having and building a family that he protected with every ounce of his being. He loved his immediate and extended family ferociously, and there was nothing he wouldn't do for us, and no greater joy than relishing in his grandchildren and his children. His eyes would light up when he would learn of both Jared's and Talia's accomplishments, and I will never forget that in the throes of illness, while he was mostly immobile, he made it to Talia's spring performance and sat mesmerized for 3 hours watching her dance. These last several years were particularly hard on my dad and all of us. Frontal lobe dementia is a devastating disease. It robbed him of his judgment and his ability to swallow and move freely. While I no longer needed to chase after him, we had some beautiful moments, driving through the mountains, going to museums, and simply sitting on his balcony looking at his garden and his koi pond. He never once complained. He was still a man of few words, and mostly I did the talking. But his deep blue eyes acknowledged his gratitude, and his smile spoke centuries. My dad was eccentric, often outrageous, complicated, brilliant, loving, and kind. He gave me a life filled with wonder and possibilities and connected me to a history whose ancestry flows through my veins like the oil he drilled, informing everything I do. He showed me the world by touching ancient and not so ancient lands, and as he ran, I ran to catch up. With every fiber of his being, he protected me, ensuring my future would not be his past. The foundation he poured was deep, the strength to fight for what was right, a belief passed down from his mother that a woman can do anything she sets her mind to do, and a generosity that spans generations. His beautiful, stubborn eyes spoke centuries, particularly at the end when he was rendered silent. He was stubborn as a mule and the strongest man I will ever know. Beneath his hardened shell, he had the most beautiful heart, and I will miss him forever and remember him until the end of time. Our entire family would like to acknowledge the amazing men and women who cared for my dad so lovingly at the end of his life. I would like to thank Amin, Azib, Widat Tayon, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing these wrong, Baram Razagnia, Brenna McCall, Christian Stefanos Bayen, Jordan Oe, Marsha Isaac Ferdinand, Mimi Biamba, Salam Elfei, Salamina Gebrew, Sharam Razagnia, Tense Berhe, Veronique Negobahia. My father truly loved all of you, and we are so grateful for the beautiful way in which you cared for him.
Thank you, Rachel, for your eloquent words. In a moment, we will hear from some recorded messages from Jack's cousins. It occurs to me, Rachel, in what you said, that perhaps the greatest act of defiance for a survivor is to have family and to have their own family. And I know that it was very important for Jack to reconnect with cousins and relatives who had survived as well and who were the descendants of survivors. So we have some recorded messages, first from...
his niece.
Thank you. From his nephew Ami and his niece Maya.
Jack was my uncle, my father's youngest brother. He was a fighter and an achiever. I always admired him for that. He was also tough. That came with the territory. Early life as a child in Nazi-occupied Europe molded his character and taught him one lesson. In order to survive, you must be tough, smart, and a fighter. Jack believed in fighting and winning. He never gave up, even when the odds were against him. He fought his fears as a child during the war. He fought Israel enemies during the War of Independence. He fought with only $20 in his pocket to be accepted as a student to the Colorado School of Mines. Fighting was Jack's professional way of life. He accumulated his fortune fighting businesses and governments around the world. Jack became rich in his 20s. He was very proud of his achievements, and rightfully so. At that time, he had adopted a philosophy which he has cited repeatedly. He said, "I have a golden rule. The one who has the gold makes the rule." My mother also had a golden rule. She said, "Never do business with your family, or you may end up with neither." But unfortunately, I ignored my mother's advice, and with Jack adhering to his golden rule, we had some clashes 35 years ago. Thanks to Celeste's unrelenting mediating efforts, we finally became close and friends again. Jack did not like to express his feelings with words. Instead, he would show them off with gestures and actions. As an example, during one of his visits to Israel, Jack surprised me with a package of oysters on ice, which he brought with him, all the way from a Denver restaurant he knew I liked. I love Jack with all his shortcomings, and I'm sorry I have not had a chance to say goodbye to him in person because of the pandemic. Jack, may you rest in peace now after a lifelong of fighting.
And we'll hear from Maya in just a moment.
Anyone who knows my family understands the great bond shared by my Uncle Jack my Uncle Victor, and my father Davy. Perhaps it was World War II that brought the three brothers close together. Perhaps it was grandmother Fanya's nurturing strength that sealed this deep connection between brothers. The roots she planted, the sense of identity she instilled in each one of her children, far away from their home country, yet stronger than ever. Perhaps it was the fact that divided by oceans, continents apart, each brother vowed unconsciously to keep the essence of family alive, and they did. Memories of Uncle Jack's children being woken up late at night to watch one of my father's movies on TV. Memories of Uncle Victor stopping in Switzerland to linger over ice cream with us. Memories of the families all reunited in Israel for my bar mitzvah. My dad passed away in 2006. Uncle Victor was long gone. But I knew with my Uncle Jack around, I somehow would always be okay. He would now be the one watching over me. 4 years later, he walked me down the aisle. I was lucky to see him again several times over the years, and for him to meet our daughter, Julia. I am left with memories of my uncle showing up in Greece, where we were vacationing with a teddy bear just for me, or jumping into a shop in Denver to buy matching sweaters for my cousin Miriam and me. I am left with love through little gestures and big ones. I am left with his 2 final visits to Switzerland, reuniting with my mother. She sends her love to you all. The brothers are gone, but within each one of us remains their spirit. Stephen, Rachel, Miriam, Ami Yael, and myself, Maya. We have their strength, we have their courage, their determination. This is not goodbye, Uncle Jack. You are a part of our lives, and within us all.
Beautiful messages. Thank you. Now I will call upon Miriam.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is very unlike me, where I did not write anything. I know for my grandmother, for other things, I will write something. And I started to, I tried, I didn't. I think had jotted some scribbles, which I can't even read. But my dad used to speak extemporaneously. And though I am clearly famished, I'm giving it a shot. But I want to look at him. You are a big soul. Really bigger than life, Dad. And I can't believe you're physically gone, or your body is gone. You fought valiantly to the end. My dad, who hung onto every moment of life, every breath of life, like the fighter and survivor that he is. You know, in the hospital these last 7 weeks, it occurred to me on Monday when he passed that he was there 7 full weeks. He completed 7. 7 is a cycle of completion. And he never gave up. He was dealing against unsurmountable odds with everything that kept coming at him in the hospital, and survived well past, I think, most humanly possible efforts. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter if he had a tube down his throat and then a trach. He valued every second of life, and he hung on. And we had, thankfully, all of us, the ability to spend time with him, to have beautiful, cherished moments with him, where you could just feel his love and his soul. I can't believe this day is here. I never thought it would happen, because you, like some of your friends, one of whom just also passed away and is buried today, thought you would live forever. And I think actually you will, because you will live forever in all of us, and your ginormous spirit isn't going away. Like many have shared, you loved the state of Israel with every fiber of your being. You fought for her like a parent protecting its child. You imbued in us this incredible love of Israel, and I am thankful to you for that. You know, we all grew up with my father, you know, as he was. We didn't, I think, kind of start to realize till maybe more recently what a unique individual you are, Dad. You know, we grew up meeting heads of state, going to very interesting countries, having interesting and bizarre experiences all over the place. And what I love about you, Dad, is that everybody was equal. You, even with your brilliance and your incredible gifts, I think actually had a tremendous sense of humility. It might have been so easily apparent, but you also lacked confidence in certain areas, even though you were brilliant. And I think you just thought of yourself actually as a regular guy, one who was, you know, fiercely devoted and wasn't going to take no for an answer. But everybody was equal to you, if they were a prime minister of a country or whomever. And you actually met a lot of these very interesting people in the business, in the oil and gas business, in whatever business it was, at many conferences that you would attend. And often they would then become a president of a country. And he would keep those relationships going. I was going to share something that I thought, no, we're not going to share that, but I just thank you for the adventures that you took us on, for the love that you shared with all of us. We all have an amazing relationship with you and you with us, and kind of catered that to our own individual needs and who we were. We all actually are a reflection of different parts of you. I'm really thankful my dad and I bonded over nature, over plants and trees. My dad loved his fruit trees and kept planting them endlessly. At one point, he had 180 fruit trees. Sadly, many were lost in frost. Though Poland became a place of trauma because of the war, he also was connected to the good parts of Poland, and he wanted to bring that to his home. And he planted gooseberries and currants. And at one point, what did we call it? The Grynberg farms? My poor mom had to deal with thousands of little currant berries that we would jam. I followed in suit and became an organic gardener and landscaper. And my dad was so proud of my garden that he graciously I had at his house, and always loved every season the fruit harvest, always asking how his fruit was, always wanting his fruit, even when he couldn't eat. We all touched on my dad's love of food. And I have wonderful memories of being in London and going to special restaurants that he loved, where and you would ask for Dover sole on the bone with the head. And we were all mortified with you eating out of the head. Your odd love of pacha, which is chicken feet that are gelled, that Mom so graciously made for you. No, you didn't make it? Oh, I guess you had it ordered. Oh. What? Your mom. And just a funny story I'm thinking of right now is that my dad, every Sunday, he would go to the deli and he would buy that huge salami that we would hang in the laundry closet. He would buy whitefish and bagels and lox, and we all had a feast, and he would make salami and eggs. And he would have tongue, sliced tongue. And it wasn't till, I don't know, maybe I was 14, that I realized what tongue was. I always thought tongue, because in his accent, I actually never heard his accent till I was an adult, but he would say tongue. And I always just thought it was T-U-N-G. And, you know, it was sliced. I never made the connection that it was actually from an animal, let alone the cow's tongue. And when Mom actually prepared tongue, this huge, disgusting thing, I couldn't touch tongue again for probably another 25 years, until recently when I tried it, and it's actually quite delicious. Thank you, Dad, for the food adventures, for travel, for passing on your love of so many things. I never liked Westerns. I never looked at Westerns, but the last few years, I started to watch your favorite things, your favorite movies, which were Westerns, and the Western Channel. And I grew to love them. I love John Wayne movies and the many other actors. I'm thankful for the last years of your life, though they were difficult, that I got to spend more time with you and meaningful time with you. And your eyes, Dad, your eyes said it all, even though speaking became so difficult for you. Your eyes and your hands and your heart were so big, and I will love you forever. And I thank you for your incredible kindness to all of us.
Thank you, Miriam. We now call upon Jack's grandchildren, Talia and Jared, Stella and Oliver.
I think we're all going to say a little something independently. So I met Saba 20 years ago, and I was a new member of the family. And I remember going over to the house on various holidays, to the house on Dasa. And from the time I was 6, the incessant question would be, are you going to go to Colorado School of Mines, or are you going to be an engineer? And that started at age 6 or age 4, and it went all the way up until, ironically enough, I sent my final application at their house because we were living there at the time. And I didn't apply to Colorado School of Mines, nor did I become an engineer, and I'm actually studying for journalism, so probably the farthest thing from that. But reflecting back on it now, I wasn't the only person he asked that. He asked Talia, Oliver, and Stella all those questions throughout their life. And it wasn't that it was unique, and it was his way of connecting with his grandchildren. And those incessant probes into becoming an engineer were his way of welcoming me into his big and beautiful and loving family. And it was a way for me to subsequently feel at home as a part of his family. And for that, I'm eternally grateful.
Okay, well, I have nothing written down either, but I will keep this short. Essentially, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about my grandfather, and it's really easy to think of all of the more analytical sides, the fact that he loved math, he loved engineering, he loved the STEM fields, but when I tried to think of the first memory ever I had of him, it was very late at night. I was very young, and he would randomly ring the doorbell with absolutely no notice. And I would be asleep, but I would wake up. And when asked why he showed up very late with no notice, he would just say, "I brought chocolate ice cream." And then nobody could refuse that. But to counteract the sugar rush, he would then agree to read bedtime stories to me so that I could fall back asleep after that. And so I just think that says so much about how he was such a complex character, and he had this analytical, this mathematical side that was very important, and I will be able to say my times tables for the rest of my life. But I also, he also had this other side that really valued stories, and of course his story was so inspirational and so meaningful. But any story was just so important, and to have like these memories that will become my stories to tell of him are just so important, and I'm so grateful for that. And so, yeah, from the bedtime stories to the stories that I'm going to tell now, they're so important and so meaningful, and they've really pushed me to dream, to follow in his footsteps as such an inspirational character, and I will continue to do that.
So for me, I always saw myself in Saba, because I saw myself in his stubbornness, in his ambition, in his love of math, his tenderness, his tricksterness, and basically everything. And so I felt very connected to him, even though I didn't see him very often. I still always had a connection to him. And those similarities were very important because they showed me where I came from, kind of what my DNA was. And I'm very proud of those connections and to be a part of Saba. And so I really just want to go through my life, my education, my career with his spirit, because as everyone has said today, he was incredible in many different ways, so many different factors. And thinking about who he was, what he accomplished, always makes me want to reach farther and continue to work harder, but also thinking of him helps me understand myself, and I'm very grateful for that. And so I just wanted to say that I love Saba. I loved his smirk, his little smile, where he always showed a little bit of his teeth, his big blue eyes, his little chuckle. So I'll miss him a lot.
Hello. I heard this news, my sister texted me. And when I got the text, I wasn't sure what to do. I was in school. I was far away from Denver. And so what I did, it didn't hit me right away. I'm not sure if it is still hitting me, but I just wrote down some memories. And I would like to share a few of them and a brief story to start. I was in class a week ago, and the teacher puts up on the screen these 9 dots, and she asks, how can you connect these with 4 lines without picking up your pen? And I'm sure you all remember this. I don't know, but I raised my hand and I was able to answer it because Saba had taught me this and gone through this with me like a bunch and kept asking me like incessantly. And I felt like a beast. I was sitting there like, I know this very complex theoretical riddle, and did not tell anyone where I kind of was taught, this was drilled in me. But I think that does represent many of the things that I was taught, and many of small tricks, and I have more of them. So I'll just read a few things. So yeah, connecting those dots. I remember him sleeping all the time, like on our couch at home, walking into the living room, and he'd just be passed out, and just like politely excusing myself. He loved eggs, like those, he collected some, he enjoyed real eggs, but Fabergé eggs as well. The cowboy hats, the Birkenstocks, the bow ties, which we are all wearing, a restaurant called Plato's, backgammon, Papados, class restaurant, great seafood. He used to collect gift cards. He gave me a Menachem Begin bobblehead. APAC pins. I have probably 20 of the same pin from the APAC, an American flag and an Israeli flag next to each other, like lapel pin. He liked marmalade, as in the jam, a lot. Enjoyed ice cream, the Broncos, panettone, like the Italian dessert. He had a, I'm not going to tell it now, but he had a nice joke about horse shows. A love for music. He loved canes. I remember his office, the knives he had on the walls, the energy. And like my sister said, his smile. I think when I think about Saba, the thing I remember most vividly is the sly smile. And then his warmth. I have distinct memories of him just being, I don't know, just kind to me, loving and soft. And I think when I put these memories together, when I read them back after I'd written some of them down, they build that character. They come together to form the man that I knew as my grandfather. And one thing I heard earlier before we were in this little room all together, Rabbi said something about being torn. And I think I am torn being up here because there's sadness. This is a sad occasion. I recognize this as something that's very sad in this moment. But I'm standing next to four of the people I love most in the world and my family who I would not be here without him. So I flew in excited to see these people and surrounded by love, and there's no feeling as nice as that. And so there's two things here, but I'm thankful that I'm surrounded by this love and I have him to thank. Yeah. Word.
Thank you, and our concluding speaker will be Stephen.
I just wanted to echo what Rachel said. First of all, I had no idea she was funny. So I did learn that today. But what all of the caregivers did for our father touched us all very deeply. Boris, your help. Marcy and Lindsay and Allison, how you protected our father over the last couple of years. And then to all of you who have come and have been friends to all of us for a long time. So for many years, I've wondered how I would possibly eulogize my father. There are just too many colors in his rainbow, too many incredible stories, too many giant projects, too many deep wounds, too many facets of this stone to even know where to start. So today I'm going to start at the end, which for me was an unexpected gift. My father was a man who sprinted wildly through life. And then suddenly, in a way, it wound down to a near stop. Without his empire to run, without his agile mobility, without his sharpest mind, prone to the constant noise of conquest, he became more gentle and more present. I remember sitting with him alone at a dinner a couple years ago. His cane was barely enough to get him into the restaurant. And as we sat, he started asking me about the film I was working on, and about my life, and about his grandkids. And it was the kind of conversation that I had given up hope of ever having with him, because we didn't have those kind of conversations. And then as he became bedbound, I would arrive from out of town, and his eyes would grow big when he saw me. And he listened to my writing, and he wanted to know about Susan's doctorate and about the kids' college aspirations. He watched my daughter Stella dance on video with this radiant smile, and he glowed at Oliver's violin playing, his eyes closed as he drifted to the music. I would walk with him through his neighborhood in his wheelchair, and he would move his head from side to side, taking in all the trees and the houses that he had moved by invisibly for years. Then we would finally sit and look over his beautiful garden and his beloved koi pond, and we would hold hands. In this newfound space that opened for him, I found parts of a father that I had been looking for my whole life. And I found tremendous healing that I think that we both shared in the end. I knew he always had this tender part. It was just that it was so often overwhelmed by the complexity of his life and his constant drive to keep moving away from the pain of the loss of his extended family. I would see and feel the sweetness and the generosity, and then it was gone under the wave of his impatience or his anger. My dad was unpredictable that way, and it was confusing, and it was riveting. Jack Grynberg lived an almost unbelievable and amazing life, but it was one always filled with fight and struggle. He was smart enough and lucky enough to have found my mom to soften his world. But the rough edges were always there, and the mercurial drive and the brilliant imagination and the passionate cunning all made my dad who he was. It was amazing being his son, and it was really hard. So I'm here today with a complicated set of feelings. I'm so sad at the loss of this man that impacted me so profoundly, unsure how I will move through the vacuum of this void, so proud that he was my dad, so happy that I came to know his gentleness finally, and still chafed that he was often too busy and too preoccupied. I am grateful that my children knew so many facets of my father, how he valued hard work and education, how he loved them, how he enjoyed teaching and then playing backgammon with them, how he shared his beloved math puzzles with them. They knew him as a joke teller and as a fierce Holocaust survivor who loved his family and wanted more than anything for them to carry on his legacy. My dad, in many ways, fought his whole life to stay alive, to be relevant, to be loved. And in the final weeks of this long, meteoric and wild ride, my dad stopped fighting. And then, in the end, he found, maybe for the first time in his life, a kind of peace. As I held his hand on Monday morning, just after he died, I felt that his soul had finally found a freedom from the long struggle to survive that filled his days. It's something I want to aspire to. Less fight, less running, less worrying, and a lot more peace. My dad used to quote his mother with this Polish saying that translated to, if you don't have it here, you got to have it here in your legs. Meaning, if you're not clever and thinking, you just have to work harder. But what I've learned from him in this final and beautiful chapter at his side is that if you don't have it here in your heart, you don't have it anywhere. God bless you, Dad. I love you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to all who shared words today. And we encourage you also to share your memories at the Shiva observance throughout the coming week. I want to let you know that there will be visitation following burial today from 3:30 to 7:30 with a service at 5:30. Friday, tomorrow, 2 to 5 p.m. with Mincha at 3 p.m. Sunday, Mincha and Mariv at 5:30, also visitation 3 to 7, and Monday the same, 3 to 7 with visitation at 5:30. Those minyanim and that visitation will take place at the home of Rachel and Rick, which is 13 Polo Club Drive. You have information provided by Feldman Mortuary. Please keep an eye out for further information to follow regarding Shiva gatherings on Monday and Tuesday, hosted by Miriam, and there will be more information about that in a subsequent email from the synagogue. In a short while, we'll invite you to join us at Fairmount Cemetery. We now will ask you to please rise to conclude the service with a memorial prayer.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים ודיורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת יעקב בן שלמה ופניה שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן, אוי בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, אנא בעל הרחמים הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר Amen.
El Malei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. To the soul of Jack Grynberg, known in our tradition as Yaakov ben Shlomo Vefanya, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May Jack's soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace, and let us say Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our service here at the Hebrew Educational Alliance. Burial will be at Emmanuel Cemetery. If you'd like to join us at the burial, we do have an escorted procession. If you'd like to join us in that procession, we'll ask you to return your cars as quickly as possible as soon as we exit with the casket and the family. Then return to your cars, have your headlights on, have your hazards on, so the escorts can identify you as being as part of our procession. We're going to be northbound on Ivanhoe, so if you'd like to get to your car and go ahead and pull out of the parking lot, then you can pull off to the side in Ivanhoe. Again, with your hazards on, we'll identify you as being part of our escorted procession. We'll ask you again to remain in your places as we escort the family and the casket out. If you do happen to see the family in the restroom or something, just please be mindful of their timing. We do need to get to the cemetery. We are strict on their time at Emmanuel Cemetery, so please allow them to do what they need to do and get to their family cars. If I can invite the pallbearers forward.
Those who are asked to be pallbearers, we invite you to come forward at this time.